following broadcast is brought to you by A.C.T, Agora Center of Thought. Here only on the Voluntary Virtues Network. Every Saturday, 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us on the dark side of radio. Agora, Anarchy, Action. Howdy, folks. We are live here. This is the Agora Underground here on the Voluntary Virtues Network. As you well know, we are live every Saturday, 8 to 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. I am your host, Comrade Dick, and I am doing this show solo, so we will be having a little personal show here with y'all. Hopefully you enjoy it. As you well know, we have been reading through Power and Market, Rothbard's magnus opus, his major treatise on economics, and the second part of which, the first part being Man, Economy, State, the second part of which being Power and Market. We have been reading through that section, which is his analysis of what the intervention of the state, or any form of intervention really, upon the voluntary exchanges of the free market, the kind of effects, unintended effects and consequences that result from such intervention, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, we have been reading this, and we are last week we started it up. The week before that, in fact, started it up, and then last week we got into section 2, and I believe read 2A. So we'll be breaking down section 2B here today, and I do appreciate you guys for tuning in. Any support that you could give to the Voluntary Virtues Network, to the Agora Underground, through our Facebook page, Agoras of Central Texas, will just be awesome. We do appreciate you guys doing that. And here I'm typing up, to be completely honest with y'all, I'm typing up, making sure that we are on the second section here on section 2, part B. Section 2 has to do with the direct effects of intervention on utility. Last week we discussed the different forms of intervention. We had the autistic, the binary, and the triangular. The binary, essentially the autistic, and then being over your any regulations imposed upon you where no transaction is involved. So when regulations are imposed upon you as to how you can access, or what you can do with your property, or what you can do with your own self, these would be autistic interventions. There is nothing in return that they offer you for these regulations, right? There's just the enforcement of, and if you refuse to comply, you will be fined or thrown in jail. Binary intervention involves a form of transaction, so you get something in return. However, you're forced to go ahead and partake in the intervention itself, which is unfortunate. So this case would be Social Security, or having to pay for public schools, or having to pay for the military, for police services, for the fire department. You're essentially forced to pay for these services through property taxes and other forms of taxation. However, you don't have a choice whether you want to or not, whether you want to receive those services or not. You're kind of forced to receive them. That is a form of intervention, though Rothbard decides to label it differently, because there is a somewhat of a reciprocal return. Maybe not, definitely not equivocal, right? Definitely not equivocal. When it's forced, we know that it's usually not for your benefit. And the final form of intervention was triangular intervention, when two or more individuals decide to engage in an exchange, and someone intervenes on as a third party in this voluntary exchange or contract between people, in essence playing the parasite in that sense. It's kind of a like a it, it's kind of an autistic form of intervention, but I guess imposed upon two people that are engaging in an exchange. So whenever you go buy gasoline, whenever you go buy something from the store, whenever you engage in the market, whenever you go to the Agora, the local marketplace, and engage in trade or and barter and sale or anything of that sort and production, these taxes essentially that are placed over you and this other the buyer or the seller in the transaction is a form of triangular intervention. And then we read up about the different form of essentially how conflict develops in all this. Um, Not sure if we yeah, I think we did read this anyway. However, if we didn't, we will read it next week. But we are on section B, page 1065, and here he's engaging democracy and the voluntary. Rothbard begins, it might be objected that all these forms of intervention are really not coercive, but voluntary. For in a democracy, they are supported by the majority of the people. But this support is usually passive, resigned, and apathetic, rather than eager, whether the state is a democracy or not. In a democracy, the non voters can hardly be said to support the rulers, and neither can the voters for the losing side. But even those who voted for the winners may well have voted merely for the lesser of two evils. The interesting question is, why do they have to vote for any evil at all? Such terms are never used by people when they act freely for themselves or when they purchase goods on the free market. No one thinks of his new suit or refrigerator as an evil or a lesser of the or greater of a choice, right? In such cases, people think of themselves as buying positive goods, not as resigningly supporting a lesser bad. The point is that the public never has the opportunity of voting on the state system itself. They are caught up in a system in which coercion over them is inevitable. But that is, it may, it may as well, we have said, all states are supported by a majority, whether a voting democracy or not. Otherwise, they can no longer continue to wield force against the determined resistance of the majority that turned against them, right? However, the support may simply reflect apathy, perhaps from the resigned belief that the state is a permanent, if unwelcome, fixture of nature. Witness the motto, nothing is as permanent as death and taxes. Isn't this so true? So much of our battle is simply a battle of ideas, a battle of concept and objective realities, right? It truly is for the minds of people. It's an info war. Not to steal a slogan, but it really is. Blavatsky said it herself at World War III. Not to get all mystical and whatnot with you guys, but Elena Blavatsky, I'm not a supporter of her or a follower in any way. But Elena Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophic Society, essentially pointed out that through her visions and all these voices she was hearing and these spirit guys she was talking to or whatnot, but essentially pointed out that World War III would be, the last war in human civilization, uh, if we're not considering the Cold War here, right? We're not supposing it's not World War IV, but let's just go to Let's go run with World War III with it. Um, Essentially, she said that it would be over the hearts and minds of the people rather than a physical, brutish battle. Primarily, it would be a war of ideas, of concepts. And isn't that true when it's applied to the state? We simply democracy continues to exist not because people fervently love it, and dedicate their lives to it and are joyous in living under such conditions, happy-go-lucky Democrats, right? Democracies, happy-go-lucky democracies. No, it's just a passive, resigned, apathetic, careless state of affairs where the state is simply deemed an eternal reality, never to be questioned, never to be dismantled. This is a sad reality. Is that so many people, the state exists because so many people are still attached to the state mentally, right, psychologically. Their psyche is dependent on the idea, the concept, the abstract notion of the state. It's it's mind-boggling. I mean, I can't say I don't understand because I wasn't born an anarchist. I became one, after researching the information and seeing where reason and logic and objective empirical truth took me. But I was hesitant at first. I think we all are, right? We all are hesitant at first because it's so contrary to what everything we've been told and everything we've been taught and brainwashed to believe, propagandized into force fed into believing. And as a result, it is intimidating, it is scary, it is sort of stepping on that new, into the new realm, on the edge, if you will, walking on thin ice, even walking off the ledge and leaving it up to fate. You're walking on new untreaded territory, concepts that you haven't fathomed before. So it is, of course, a mental struggle in so many senses. It's the matrix, right? I mean, um, we need to free our minds first. So people believing that the state is inevitable, the system of coercion is inevitable, just the fact of mentally having that attachment and anchoring to it is keeping us in this state of affairs. But he continues on here on 1066. But he says, "Be that as it may, as we have said, all states are supported by a majority, whether a voting democracy or not. Otherwise, they could not long continue to wield force against the determined resistance of the majority." And I believe we already read that. Yeah, so that basically finishes up that section. Because he continues on here to say basically that nothing is as permanent. Okay, I see where we're at. I'm sorry about that. Nothing is as permanent as death and taxes, right? That infamous phase. All these little slogans that keep us enslaved, right? Nothing is permanent as permanent as death and taxes. Curiosity killed the cat. He continues on here that setting all these matters aside, however, and even granting that the state might be enthusiastically supported by a majority, we still do not establish its voluntary nature. For the majority is not society, is not everyone. Majority coercion over the minority is still coercion. Since state exists and they are accepted for generations and centuries, we must conclude that a majority are at least passive supporters of all states. For no minority can for long rule an actively hostile majority. In a certain sense, therefore, all tyranny is majority tyranny, regardless of the formalities of the governmental structure. But this does not change our analytic conclusion of conflict and coercion as a corollary of the state. The conflict and coercion exists no matter how many people coerce how many others. Wow, isn't that deep? All forms of tyranny are, in essence, majority rule. How can you claim such a thing? Are, in essence, democracy, right? All forms of tyranny are, in essence, democracy. How can we claim such a thing? Well, because in order for the tyranny to actually happen in reality, there needs to be a supportive underlying majority, right? There needs to be a majority that is supporting the system at large. What's going on? or else there it wouldn't even be happening. So that's definitely mind blowing. So many times we find ourselves as libertarians, as humanitarians, so concerned with people that are suffering unnecessarily around the world, involuntarily around the world. Poverty, starvation, unnecessary starvation, the redistribution of wealth, the stagnation of people's individualism and their creativity. Um, you know, uh, Obviously, the misdirection of funds that could be, who knows, right? The unknown, unfathomable inventions or micro societies that we could have built with all those funds that were misdirected into other things. It's just insane. It's just insane. I mean, all that can exist so long as there remains an active majority, whether passively, resigningly, hesitantly, whatever. Nonetheless, a majority supporting it, and so that's an awesome point. I mean, I would have to conclude completely. I mean, just take it down to a situation with a room of 10 people, right? I mean, those 10 people, in order for any number of them, one or two or three or whatever, to get oppressed, to get enslaved, there would need to be the overwhelming support of the rest of the group, right? If you have those two people not agreeing to being enslaved, and then you have another three or four that don't agree, now you have a separation, right? You have essentially it's in the minority that want people to be enslaved. Now, if you have the rest of the eight of the people in the group who agree with the fact that these two being enslaved and these two voting otherwise, then that's how the tyranny gets enforced, right? That's how the violence gets legitimized. Is when the majority of the people think they're on the right side of things. So here, moving on. That was section B, democracy. Um, why democracy is an intervention, and how it's an intervention on voluntary exchange and cooperation. Really good stuff. I really enjoy that. The next section here is C, section C, utility and resistance to invasion. He goes on to say that to our comparative welfare economic analysis of the free market and the state, it might be objected that when defense agencies restrain an invader from attacking someone's property, they are benefiting the property owner at the expense of a loss of utility by the would-be invader. Since defense agencies enforce rights on the free market, does not the free market also involve a gain by some at the expense of the utility of others, even if these others are invaders? In answer, we may state first that the free market is a society in which all exchange is done voluntarily. It may also easily be conceived as a situation in which no one aggresses against person or property. In that case, it is obvious that the utility of all is maximized on the free market. And that is to say, your own personal aspect of utility. Since nothing was taken from you, you can maximize your personal utility. However you want, those things applied. In that case, it is obvious that the utility of all is maximized on the free market. Okay. Defense agencies become necessary only as a defense against invasions on that market, on that voluntary, cooperative, social structure, right? It is the invader, not the existence of the defense agency, that inflicts losses on his fellow men. A defense agency existing without an invader would simply be a voluntary established insurance against future attacks, right? Possible, probable attacks. That's all it would be. The existence of a defense agency does not violate the principle of maximum utility. and it still reflects mutual benefit to all concerned. Yeah, it doesn't alter, it doesn't violate the principle of maximum utility, because many people will find it to their maximum personal utility to hire, right, to pay for such services in order to ensure the protection of their accumulated wealth, of their accumulated goods, right? I mean, essentially their necessities. And of course, it's to the benefit of all concerned, right? Since it's voluntary, everyone is benefiting. This is just an obvious. An exchange implies mutual benefit. However, we're going on here that conflict enters only with the invader himself, right, or herself. The invader, let us say, is in the process of committing an aggressive act against Smith, thereby injuring Smith for his gain. The defense agency, rushing to the aid of Smith, of course, injures the invader's utility, but it does so only to counteract the injury to Smith. It does help to maximize the utility of the non criminals. Right. It does so to help to maximize the utility of the non criminals. Yeah, those that aren't aggressing, the insurance, right? The security agency is maximizing their utilities, protecting their marginal utility, right? Their property. The principle of conflict and loss of utility was introduced not by the existence of the defense agencies, but by the existence of the invader. It is still true, therefore, that utility is maximized for all in the free market, whereas to the extent that there is an invasive interference in society, it is infected with conflict and exploitation of man by man. Exactly. I mean, that's the essence of any kind of interference, right? So, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, utility and the resistance to invasion. A lot of people will argue, and comms or whatnot, syndicalists will argue that the defense of property is in itself harmful towards those that are being aggressed upon. Those that are being, in other words, people deemed criminal for trespassing on X or Y Z property. Now, of course, uh, you know, restitution should be commensurate to the actual crime itself. Should be proportional to the crime itself, right? Um, I mean, just because someone walks across your field or walks in your flower bed, right? Infamous Cantwell situation. I mean, doesn't mean you can just unload a clip, right, in that person's face. So there is justice in the sense that, or at least equivocal justice in the sense that the punishment needs to fit the crime. If it doesn't, you're surpassing the boundaries. And it's only the those that have initiated the violence initially, right? Double entendre right there. That they have caused their own demise. They have brought in the diminishing value of utility by bringing in aggression into the situation. So that's the problem. Now we're moving on to section D here, um, called the argument from envy. And he goes on to say here that another objection holds that the free market does not really increase the utility of all individuals, because some may be so smitten with envy at the success of others that they really lose in utility as a result. We cannot, however, deal with hypothetical utilities divorced from concrete action. We may, as praxeologists, deal only with utilities that we can deduce from concrete behavior in human beings, right? A person's envy embodied in action becomes pure moonshine from the praxeological point of view. All that we know is that has participated in the free market and to that extent benefits by it. How he feels about the exchange made by others cannot be demonstrated to us unless he commits an invasive act. Even if he publishes a pamphlet denouncing these exchanges, we have no ironclad proof that this is not a joke or a deliberate lie. I'm not familiar with this particular argument, though it seems something that would be spewed out of the same mindset of collectivist, socialist, communistic rhetoric. The idea, I guess, that the free market gives rise to envy, right? Some people will obviously be more proficient in their trade and are more successful in their particular market, and thus gain more material benefits as a result. And so, of course, some people are going to either admire, or even right, pay reverence or homage, or even envy, right, and want to steal, essentially steal at that point. And I guess some it seems like some socialists here are arguing that such a creation of envy what I mean essentially what that the market induces such envy in the people's hearts and minds, uh, which is just it's just hilarious, right? It's like saying that the market creates scarcity or whatnot. I mean, human beings are naturally envious, regardless of the market, right? I mean, you can have everyone just standing in a row, butt naked, right? And people are going to envy each other. So, um, but this is just, it's just interesting. I hadn't heard that one. It's it really reminds me of the infamous long rant that character Atlas Shrug had concerning money at the party when he's going off on money. And look it up here. But yeah, he goes off on money and basically explains to the people that in the situation he's at the party, the character, and he's explaining to them that money is a product, right? I mean, it's a 20-minute long rant. I mean, essentially when you're reading through it, but really the part that I like that is pertaining to this is that something along the lines he says, money. Um, I forget what it was, but it's essentially the idea that those that become greedy, um, or those that rather use their money for greed, use their money for diabolical purposes, for evil, conniving pursuits. They themselves had this issue with themselves in their heart already to begin with, right? It's not the money that corrupted them. It's their own psyche. It's their lack of dedication to reason and logic that has corrupted them. So to blame money would be an excuse, a cop out to actually analyzing the individual for themselves. So same with this envy thing, right? To blame the fact that others have more than other people, right? Than people have more than other people. That there's a sense an equivocal inequality of material goods spread around amongst people, obviously because those goods are gained through work, and people decide to work at different levels, and people have different levels of contribution that they can bring into the market. Obviously, this is going to create an inequality of wealth, and because of that, you're going to blame selfishness on that. I mean, really, selfishness existed prior to the fact, right? Those people were selfish prior to the fact. They were envious prior to the fact of wealth being created. That was in their nature. So, I mean, it's again, it's the argument of I guess it's if you were to compare it to anything, it'd be like the gun argument, right? The idea that guns kill people, right? I mean, we all know that people kill people, and the government. We all know that the government kills people, not guns. No, no, but we all know that people kill people, right? I mean, it's a gun's just a weapon, so it's the malicious malintent and the conniving heart of a killer that uses the a weapon intended for self-defense in order to kill. Right, in short. So here we're going on to section E, and this is the last section in chapter 2, the fundamentals of intervention in power and market. And section E is called utility ex post. And he begins on page 1069 that he says, we have thus seen that individuals maximize their utility ex ante, beforehand, right, on the free market, and that the direct results of an invasion is that the invader's utility gains at the expense of a loss in utility by his victim. But what about utilities ex post, after the fact? People may expect to benefit when they make a decision, but do they actually benefit from its results? The remainder of this volume will largely consist of analysis of what we may call the indirect consequences of the market or of intervention, supplementing the above direct analysis. It will deal with the chains of consequences that can be grasped only by study and are not immediately visible to the naked eye. The seen and the unseen, right? Error can always occur in the path from ante, beforehand, to post, to afterwards. But the free market is so constructed that this error is reduced to a minimum. In the first place, there is a fast working, easily understandable test that tells the entrepreneur, as well as the income receiver, whether he is succeeding or failing at the task of satisfying the desires of the consumer. For the entrepreneur, who carries the main burden of adjustment to uncertain consumer desires, the test is swift and sure: profits or losses. Large profits are a signal that he has been on the right track. Losses that he has been on the wrong one. Profits and losses thus spur rapid adjustment to consumer demands. At the same time, they perform the function of getting money out of the hands of bad entrepreneurs and into the hands of good ones. The fact that good entrepreneurs prosper and add to their capital and poor ones are driven out ensures an ever smoother market adjustment to changes in conditions. Similarly, to a lesser extent, land and labor factors move in accordance with the desire of their owners for higher incomes, and more productive factors are rewarded accordingly. I really like that prior notion here, the fact that good entrepreneurs prosper and add to their capital, and poor ones are driven out, ensures an ever smoother market adjustment to changes in conditions. I mean, that's such a foundational point. Um, this really applies to hoarding too, but the idea of monopolies forming, or successful businesses, somehow being more privileged than less successful businesses. In a truly free market situation, a successful business, one that is out competing the rest, is doing so, as we said earlier, voluntarily, right? Or else it wouldn't be a free market, not through subsidies or tax breaks, or any kind of special licensing or protectionism, but really out competing their opponents in the marketplace through market means. Then the money that they're gaining, the capital gains that they're accumulating through this process of out competing the rest, is actually ensuring a better and smoother market. And the reason that that's an obvious fact is because if people are choosing to buy this XYZ's company's product or service over everyone else's, and they happen to be out competing everybody else, it's obviously for a reason, right? Not that the market necessarily solely depends on majority rule or majority consent, but but how would I say? The majority does have a way more of an effect on the market than through politics, right? And as a result, um, if you're not pleasing your customer better than your competitors, you're probably not going to get that business, right? So it's natural to come to the conclusion that if a business is being really successful in a truly free market, there's no reason to subsidize the loser, right? There's no reason to bail out the loser, right? I mean, the reason they lost is because they weren't giving proper, they weren't delivering their on the product or the service. The people didn't want it, or they could have had a wonderful product and service, but there was no demand for it. That's a problem. I mean, there's no demand for I don't know, a $12,000 glass pipe or something that's got diamonds and crystals on it. I mean, you can only make so many of those until you've saturated the market. Right? There's no one else is going to want to buy one of those. Probably get one or two sold, and that's about it. So it's just ridiculous, to think that somehow, uh, you know, through the market. I mean, we're not talking about the way the situation is now. I mean, a lot of companies that are successful and established and ingrained in the market nowadays didn't get there through superior marketability, right? A lot of them got there through state incentives, through state help, right? Through state handouts, again, subsidies or protectionism or tax breaks of some sort or another. I mean, so this is just it's just the nature of it. It's just the nature of that. It's a horrible reality. Um, and here we were just reading on we're on page 1070. But yeah, I mean that's a really crucial point that the market uh, leads to successful businesses. I mean that's just an obvious reality. It's voluntary. Um, those that serve the best are going to make outcompete the rest. So we're continuing on here. 1070. Consumers also take entrepreneurial risk on the market. Many critics of the market, while willing to concede the expertise of the capitalist entrepreneurs, bewail the prevailing ignorance of consumers, which prevents them from gaining the utility ex post that they expected to have ex ante. Typically, Wesley C. Mitchell entitled one of his famous essays, The Backward Art of Spending Money. Professor Ludwig von Mises has keenly pointed out the paradoxical position of so many progressives who insist that consumers are too ignorant or incompetent to buy products intelligently, while at the same time touting the virtues of democracy, where the same people vote for politicians whom they do not know and for policies that they hardly understand. Yeah, right. Try to swallow that cluster. In fact, the truth is precisely the reverse of the popular ideology. Consumers are not omniscient, but they do have direct tests by which to acquire their knowledge. They buy a certain brand of breakfast food and they do not like it, so they don't buy it again. They buy a certain type of automobile and they do like its performance, so they buy another eventually. In both cases, they tell their friends of this newly won knowledge. Other consumers patronize consumers' research organizations, which can warn or advise them in advance. But in all cases, the consumers have the direct test of results to guide them, and the firm that satisfies the consumers expands and prospers, while the firm that fails to satisfy them goes out of business. Isn't that the beauty of the free market as well? I mean, uh, you get to choose personally through experience. You get to buy this one product, one time through, and then if you really enjoyed it, if it delivered, on what you wanted it to do, and you enjoyed it, then you buy it again, right? If you didn't like it, then you don't. I mean, it's that hands-on experience. It's that personal. I mean, not to get subjective thing with here on how reality is to be determined, but I mean, isn't it liberating to think that every person has the right to eat as they see fit and wear what they what they want to and listen to the type of music they want to and so on and so forth. I mean, so it's just it's just that great idea of being able to buy something and test it out for yourself, and not having to force the rest of society to do the same in order to test it out. Anyway, so he goes on here to say that on the other hand, well, listen, here's that point, right? On the other hand, voting for politicians and public policies is a completely different matter. Here, there are no direct tests of success or failure, whatever. Neither profit and losses nor enjoyable or unsatisfying consumption. In order to grasp consequences, especially the indirect consequences of governmental decisions, it is necessary to comprehend the complex chains of praxeological reasoning, such as will be developed in this volume. Very few voters have the ability or the interest to follow such reasoning, particularly, as Sumter points out, in political situations. For in political situations, the immediate influence that any person has on the results, as well as the seeming remoteness of the actions, induces people to lose interest in political problems or argumentation. Lacking the direct test of success or failure, the voters tend to turn not to those politicians whose measures have the best chance of success, but to those with the ability to sell their propaganda. Without grasping logical chains of deduction, the average voter will never be able to discover the error that the rulers make. Thus, suppose that a government inflates the money supply, thereby causing an inevitable rise in prices. The government can blame the price rise on wicked speculators or alien black markets. And unless the public knows economics, it will not be able to see the fallacies, these fallacious fallacies, in the ruler's arguments. It is ironic that those writers who complain of the wiles and lures of advertising do not direct their criticism at the advertising of political campaigns, where their charges would be relevant. As Shumter states, the picture of the prettiest girl that ever lived will, in the long run, prove powerless to maintain the sales of a bad cigarette. There is no equally effective safeguard in the case of political decisions. Many decisions of fateful importance are of a nature that makes it impossible for the public to experiment with them at its leisure and at moderate cost. Even if that is possible, however, judgment is, as a rule, not so easy to arrive at as it is in the case of a cigarette, because effects are less easy to interpret. I mean, this is just fundamental here. I mean, this is so concrete in understanding anarchy versus politics, right? Understanding the market versus the force, right, and aggression. Is that there's no way to really grasp the effects of political action. There's no way. I mean, when you consider the amount of time new legislation takes in order to fully trickle down and come into effect, when you consider just there's so many unseen factors and how disconnected people directly are from the levers, right? If you right figuratively, the levers that are being pulled, they can't see the direct consequences of the levers that are being pulled because they can't even see the levers that are being pulled. They're not there in the actual, uh, right, in the actual seat of doing such a thing. So it's only through experience, right? This is another crucial empirical truth. It's only through our senses and our experiences and our personal grasping of reality, that we get to understand things and get to really promote things, right? And get to understand them to a point to where we can promote them. So with goods and services that we directly interact with our senses, that we directly experience through our senses, then we can have a concrete, a specific answer as to what it did or didn't do for us, and how it altered our perspective, right? Whether for the good or for the worse, right? For the better or for the worse. Whereas with politics, as Rothbard's been pointing out, and this Shumter guy, um, it's just impossible, right, to interpret such a thing. I mean, it really is. I mean, uh, how do we know what effects of the economy today are a direct result of Barack Obama, or which ones are a direct result from you know the efforts put into action by George W. Bush? Again, there's no real way to determine such a thing, because we're not the ones pulling the levers, right? So we don't see how things are affected by certain policies, certain arbitrary policies, or so-called laws, regulations and whatnot. So that's a really good point. I really do enjoy that. That's awesome. We're still going here. 1071. He goes on to say that after that quote there by Shumter, he goes on to say that it might be objected that while the average voter may not be competent to decide on policies that require for its decision chains of praxeological reasoning, he is competent to pick experts, that is, the politicians and bureaucrats, who will decide on the issues, just as the individual may select his or her own private expert advisor in any one of the numerous fields. But the point is precisely that in government, the individual does not have the direct personal test of success or failure for his hired expert that he does on the market. On the market, individuals tend to patronize those experts who advise proves most successful. Good doctors or lawyers reap rewards on the free market, while the poor ones fail. The privately hired expert tends to flourish in the proportion to his demonstrated ability. The government, on the other hand, there is no concrete test of the expert's success, unfortunately, right? There is no profit incentive. In the absence of such a test, there is no way by which the voter can gauge the true expertise of the man he must vote for. This difficulty is aggravated in modern style elections, where the candidates agree on all the fundamental issues. For issues, after all, are susceptible to reasoning. The voter can, if he so wishes, and he has the ability to learn about and decide on the issues. But what can any voter, even the most intelligent, know about the true expertise or competence of individual candidates, especially when elections are shorn of virtually all important issues? The voter can then fall back only on the purely external package personalities or image of the candidates. The result is that voting purely on candidates makes the result even less rational than mass voting on issues themselves. Wow, that's true, right? Referendums, I guess, are at least a little bit more appealing to reason and logic than just voting for candidates, right? Since they so politically incorrect, or so politically correct that speaking about anything politically incorrect is just out of the question, right? I mean, getting into any of the tough issues, tough questions, tough answers is never going to be heard on a political debate. So might as well vote on the issues, right? Get more done. Um, Makes sense. Not for democracy here, not for voting, guys, but at least if you're going to be for democracy and voting, you might as well call for referendums alone, right? Voting on issues alone. Furthermore, the government itself contains inherent mechanisms that lead to poor choices of experts and officials. For one thing, the politician and the government expert receives their revenues not from services voluntarily purchased on the market, but from a compulsory levy on the populace. These officials, therefore, wholly lack the pecuniary incentive to carry about serving the public properly and competently. And what is more, the vital criterion of fitness is very different in the government and on the market. In the market, the fittest are those most able to serve the consumers. In the government, the fittest are those most adept at wielding coercion and or those most adroit at making demagogic appeals to the voting public. Another critical divergence between market action and democratic voting is this. The voter has, for example, only 1/50 millionth power to choose among his would-be rulers, who in turn will make vital decisions affecting him, unchecked and unhampered until the next election. And the market, on the other hand, the individual has the absolute sovereign power to make the decisions concerning his person and property, not merely a distant 1/50 millionth power, but on the market, the individual is continually demonstrating his choice of buying or not buying, selling or not selling, in the course of making absolute decisions regarding his property. The voter, by voting for some particular candidate, is demonstrating only a relative preference over one or two other potential rulers. He must do this within the framework of the coercive rule that whether or not he votes at all, one of these men will rule over him for the next several years. Thus, we see that the free market contains a smooth, efficient mechanism for bringing anticipated ex ante utility into realization of ex post. The free market always maximizes beforehand social utility as well. In political action, on the contrary, there is no such mechanism. Indeed, the political process inherently tends to delay and thwart the realization of any expected gains. Furthermore, the divergence between ex post after the fact gains through government and through the market is even greater than this. For we shall find that in every instance of government intervention, the indirect consequences will be such as to make the intervention appear worse in the eye of many of its original supporters. In sum, the free market always benefits every participant, and it maximizes social utility after the fact. It also tends to do so afterwards. So I'm sorry, ex ante, so before the fact. So in sum, the free market always benefits every participant and maximizes social utility before the fact. It also tends to do so afterwards, since it works for rapid conversion of anticipations into realizations. Right? You want, yeah. I mean, this is just incredible. I mean, with intervention, one group gains directly at the expense of another, and therefore social utility cannot be increased. The attainment of goals is blocked rather than facilitated. And as we shall see, the indirect consequences are such that many interveners themselves will use utility after the fact. The remainder of this work is largely devoted to tracing the indirect consequences of various forms of governmental intervention. And we are done with that. So that's pretty much it right there. I mean, that's pretty good stuff. I mean, I can't even. I definitely need to grasp that last section we were reading there. Um, but it makes sense, it makes sense that at least with the market again, you have direct access to the consequences of your direct action, right? Any action that you take, any decision that you make, is going to directly affect you, and you can thus test it more precisely, right? More directly, more correctly, right? More directly and correctly, whether that decision was a beneficial one or not, right? So it's an immediate marker as to whether you're on the right track. I mean, you don't with voting, you don't know whether you're on the right track or not until it's until you're getting sent to the concentration camps. And by then it's a little bit too late. Or once the new war is declared, and then you know you elected the wrong guy. So it's just another great reason to ask for a marketable society, right? Because when you apply these truths of the market to marketable security and marketable arbitration, then we see how quickly, because of these truths, these fundamental principles on the market, we see how quickly security and arbitration will become effective, efficient, cheap, and competitive if we just simply opened up to market forces, right? People would be able to immediately, directly test the efficiency of a certain security agency. If they don't like that one, they'll test directly and be able to test and analyze the efficiency and of another one, right? So this is directly and contributing to their analysis as to whether which one's more beneficial for them directly, instead of having to work through the political process. And by then you don't even how would you even know? How would you even know, right? I mean, it's just years after the fact of certain policies, you start to see the effects. So just really good stuff. I really do suggest you guys read it, check it out. We're gonna be posting. I'm gonna post the on here on the YouTube video down at the bottom. If you read the description, got the post to the PDF. You can read along, and definitely think about this, contemplate it. Good stuff, man. Definitely stuff to get those neurons firing off. So do appreciate you guys tuning in. As you know, this is the Agora Underground. Your host, Comrade Dick here, and we'll be back next week. Laissez faire to each and every one of you. Agora, anarchy, action.